Master Your Mindset Radio, episode number 10.
Welcome to Master Your Mindset Radio, the show where we empower you to conquer limiting beliefs and transform your world with your gifting and purpose. Now for your host, Elizabeth Nader.
Hey friends, welcome back to another edition of Master Your Mindset Radio. I am so excited about today. I've been looking forward to this. I have the honor to interview Lisa Petitt today. Lisa, are you there?
I am.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Equal pleasure.
It's just really something that I've been thinking so much about ever since I met you. You know, Lisa, I have to tell you guys, she is one of a kind. I met her probably only a year ago, heard her speak at my son's school, and ever since then, it's like our hearts were knitted together. Everything she said, I got her, I understood her, and she is something special. She is a force to be contended with for sure. And I wanted you guys to hear from her today. She has a story to tell that, you know, at times it's tough to hear, but it's also incredibly encouraging. It's something that needs to be told, and it's all about purpose and mindset and all the things that I constantly preach about. This woman lives them. She walks them out. Lisa is a mother of three. She is an addiction recovery counselor and public speaker. She is an advocate for change. I'll let her talk about what she's doing. But I want to start with some background. Lisa, if you could just tell me about your family, your children, talk about what it was like raising Casey, whatever you want to tell us, and then we'll get into Casey's story.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I was the suburban stay-home mom of three. I lived a good life, typical dysfunctional family that we have today. I have been studying the Bible and quoting scripture and praying specifically and strategically for over 30 years. I understand the consequences of sin and my foolish choices throughout my journey as much as I understand grace. Yet, this did not make me exempt from the unthinkable. My story usually begins with my son, Casey. I have two other children, Braden, who's now 14, and my daughter, 25 years old and has a child of her own. But my Casey boy, he was my sensitive, deep-feeling boy. As an infant and a toddler and a teenager, his emotions were expressed with intensity. In his early years, I was concerned about his level of fear and anxiety, but was usually reassured by others, including professionals. It was just the uniqueness of his personality. Our friends used to call him the angry comic because he would angrily protest our humor and demand we stop laughing at him. I thought he was just insecure. His empathetic personality often created an inability to separate himself from another's emotional experience, which caused his moods to fluctuate quite easily. The biological threat of mental illness already existed because of our family history, so the life stressors he endured throughout his short life made him very vulnerable to the development of depression. He was intelligent, but he had trouble in school with the academic expectations in a demanding school district. And when he experienced the punitive consequences of falling behind in school, his behavior took a parallel turn. Testing revealed he had a slow processing time, and he was diagnosed with ADD. In his early teens, at a critical time of adolescent development, his father and I divorced. Casey slipped into a debilitating sadness, and he was in and out of therapy, on and off prescription drugs. He didn't like the side effects of the long, vulnerable process of healing. He willed himself better, and when that didn't work, he began to self-medicate. It started with a beer, graduated to a cigarette, and moved towards marijuana. The emotional pain, peer influence, the accessibility, and the immaturity of his adolescent brain led to further experimentation. I was a fear-driven parent, fear that came from my own childhood experiences. Although I knew and confessed grace, my heart was captive to the law of sin and death. What I mean is I was always afraid. No matter what you confess from your mouth, you know, Elizabeth, your mind looks for evidence to support what you believe and not what you say.
So as a fear-driven parent, because I think a lot of us struggle with that in different ways. When you say that, I think I identify with that. I'm sure a lot of parents listening do. How did that come up in your relationship with Casey? How do you think that fear that you led with, maybe even at times unknowingly, how did that affect Casey?
It's definitely unknowingly. I think you're right. I think as mothers, parents, we have an element of fear, as we should. Um, so I told them fear was not of God,
Mm-hmm.
and they were given a spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. If they were afraid, if they had a bad dream, that was my go-to.
Mm-hmm.
I said no to many a play date, TV shows, and violent cartoons. But here's the truth. Here's the difference between wisdom and fear. I didn't say no because of wisdom or an innate instinct. It was because it was coming from my mind and not from my spirit. And I know that sounds a little hard to comprehend, but there is a difference. There is something that is driven from a place of wisdom, a place of knowledge, discernment, where this could be dangerous. Mine was really, I'm afraid they'll be hurt. I'm afraid of leaving them anywhere. I'm afraid of sleepovers, summer camps, and parents I don't know. I was afraid they'd feel abandoned or unprotected, which I was projecting. So my actions to protect them, shield them, guide them, and teach them are all driven by love, but it was love and fear, not love and wisdom.
That is amazing. That difference. You just
Yeah.
hit on something that I think will help a lot of people, that it's you think you're making a good decision based. I don't even know if a lot of times we use the word wisdom, but we think, well, we're making a good decision. We're protecting our child. But it's the root of it. It's what's behind that decision is what we really need to look at. So using wisdom versus constantly walking around in fear. And you didn't even realize that you were in fear, right?
No, you know why it's not easily recognizable is because the decisions can actually be wise. They could actually be the right decisions. But if you lack discernment, see, I lacked discernment because there was no need to discern. It looked dangerous, it was. If there was risk of any kind, the answer was no. I didn't need to pray about it. The fact is, the answer may not have changed if I did, but the delivery might have, because remember, I'm operating on a core belief. It's from my own projection, my own fear, my own mindset. It's not about, it was, yes, I want to protect you, but the message, it's not the choice we make, it's what it's driven by. It's the vehicle that decision is driven. So so that's really, the fact is, the answers may not change. I told my children it was okay to make mistakes, but my messages were in contradictory to that. Fear drives the law. Fear is controlling and not empowering. So children, if you're empowering them, it's empowerment. If you're controlling them, they know.
Yeah.
I told my children that it was okay to make mistakes, but I didn't believe that. Not for myself. It wasn't okay for me to make a mistake. So I might have been confessing that, but my core belief was it's not okay to make a mistake. So that's the vehicle in which my decision was driving.
And your kids picked up on that. In other words,
Absolutely.
kids are smart enough to know mom may be saying it's okay for you guys to make a mistake, but the truth is they knew that you weren't giving yourself that same permission, and therefore what did they end up really believing? It's not what's
Yes.
said, it's what's caught, right?
Yes. So, it's that my delivery conveyed when it's the way the delivery of my message conveyed to my children when they made a mistake was it was not okay. Did they feel remorse and reflection, or did they feel shame? Did they experience the law in that moment of correction or decision making, or did they experience grace and love? Did I empower them to choose life, to establish a healthy mindset governed by God's promises, or did I render them powerless? Did they obey me out of respect and love, or was it fear?
Amazing. So that you're seeing that all now, but when
Yeah.
when Casey started to, he had the issues in school, he started to have the prescription drugs to help him with his ADD and things like that. As that all started to become part of his life, how do you think this approach? Do you think this affected him in some way? I mean, how do you think he dealt with that? What was your relationship like with him?
It was pretty intense. How did it translate with my son was he knew I was afraid, and there's even lyrics to a song that he wrote, and if I had them handy, I'd quote them, but I found it after he died, and he basically said, Mom, the smile, I'm trying, and I want you to know how sorry I am for the choices I'm making and who I've become, but I want you to know all I'm trying to do is put a smile on my face And in an attempt to do that, I have become a disgrace. And so what was really driving him to self-medicate was this lack of lack of worth. He was bullied at a young age that affected his psyche and his development, which is another topic. He really felt misunderstood. That's written in the lyrics. So in my attempt to help him, I think he felt misunderstood by me, like I wasn't getting it. And here's the truth. I really wasn't getting it because there was so much I didn't know. There's so much we don't know as parents that I know today. I didn't know the resources available. I didn't know that he was 4 times likely to develop an addiction because of his ADD. There were so many things I did not know that I know now that maybe I could have taken a slightly different approach with my son, but it was mostly panic. And so that energy of panic, my son just felt like I have to please my mom. So he kind of hid some of the intensity and the severity of his mental illness and his problems. He was trying to will himself better because he saw what it was doing to me. Like we loved each other, and he saw me like almost begging him to be okay. And so he was trying to be okay, so that's the dynamic. Like the more he tried without the resources and the understanding, he failed. And the more he failed, the more he hated himself, because now it wasn't just him. It was, look what I'm doing to my mother.
It's the amount that he loved you and wanted to please, and the degree to which you were panicking. And I think let's get into that, because we kind of left you off where he's getting diagnosed with all of this and things are getting harder for him. And this is where he starts to slip into some bad decisions, and you start to panic, if that's the right word, over some choices he starts to make. Can you start to talk about what that looked like, what decisions he was making, and what was starting to happen with him?
Well, it was starting to be reflected in his grades. I was getting a lot of phone calls. I went to a lot of meetings. I was truly, I was saying, my son is in trouble. My son is on a bad road. This isn't benign. My son is just smoking pot. That's what I hear. Well, at least it's just pot. No, it's not just pot. He's smoking pot to self-medicate emotions. There's a severe academic decline. His moods are changing. And I really felt at that time like I was banging on doors and nobody was answering. I was shouting, somebody help us, and nobody could hear us. It was one of the most frustrating times of my life, because I did see and I did know enough to know that my son was on the road to death. I knew it. And I was perpetually fighting to get him off of it, to the point where I wrote him letters and said, please remember God in those moments. Please remember him, because I don't know what to do anymore. I don't want you to die. Because the decisions he were making, he has an adolescent brain. Elizabeth, they have that underdeveloped prefrontal cortex where they make rational decisions. Yeah. And they have that overactive limbic system where they feel their emotions. So he had an impaired ability to see distant consequence, and he was driven largely by his emotional part of his brain. So no matter what I said, there was a disconnect, and I didn't know that about his brain, by the way. I did not know that. So I had this, what are you doing?
Right.
Like so many of us parents do. What were you thinking?
Right.
Or don't you know that you're on a bad and destructive road?
Right.
But they don't. Right. They don't see distant consequence. So it really looked like me chasing answers and begging, and not really knowing how, to recognize that I was knocking on the wrong doors. I didn't know the amount of resources that are available to parents and to children struggling with mental illness and addiction issues. I didn't know I was knocking on the wrong doors.
Right.
I also had some opposition. When there's division in the way you're raising children, having that division, if you're not a united front, can cause a lot of conflict. And
so there was like a perfect storm here for you, because, you're hearing Casey's adolescent. He had some bullying in school, which we know it can affect your brain, right? It affects the way you develop. He had, issues at home and strife and things that, he didn't choose, but things that happen to many people. He had the ADD diagnosis. he was starting to be treated with that, right? And then I'm assuming at some point he's exposed to marijuana, and that's for you. People are saying, well, no biggie, which we know better, right? We know better now. We know how that affects the brain, and you know that better than anyone based on what you've been through in the research. Then it starts to get more serious. Then what's happening? Now we're getting into what?
Yes, because when now armed with knowledge and education, I can tell you painfully, his brain didn't stand a chance. It really didn't. I can see that now. Unfortunately, it's too late for my son, but not for someone else's. Because my son, he had the biologics, because addiction is a biopsychosocial disease. So biology, he had the genetic predisposition to addiction and mental illness because of family history. So we had that. But, your circumstances and your biology don't make you an addict. It's your core beliefs and your thought lives that produces that. Just like if you have a predisposition to diabetes, you're not going to get diabetes if you don't eat excessive sugar. So it's that kind of thing. So you had the biological component, the social component, which makes up a family and all that. There was a divorce in the midst of that. He had a propensity towards depression. He also was extremely empathetic, and he was an artist, and those type of children are very deep feeling. Mm-hmm. So they don't know how to navigate through adolescence with their brain development. They take on their own pain and the pain of other people, and they really need some help in discerning, and emotional regulation so that they only solve the problems they have and not try to solve the problems of the world. But they take this on all internally. So it's like it's an overstimulation to their brain. It's very overwhelming, and they want to manage it. Like they want to feel good. Now they feel bad. So that's the psychological was the bullying. Mm-hmm. That was at the time. Again, bullying wasn't frowned upon the way it is now. Now that research shows it has a direct relationship to their emotional development and can really affect the psyche of a child. Mm-hmm. And it had a role in my son's death. Mm. I say this in my video, I'll Never Get Addicted, a story, my son's story told by his mother. I say this, that in my son's case, I use the analogy of making a cake. Flour by itself does not make a cake. Sugar by itself does not make a cake. But when you take ingredients collectively, and you've got your milk and your sugar and your eggs and your flour, and then the right environment, which would be an oven, you will get a cake. That's just the way it goes. And in my son's case, when you take the biologics and then the ADD and the psychological components, and then you put the social environment, the environment which our children are being raised in today with so many venues for addiction, the minimizing, the glamorizing of alcohol, the minimizing of marijuana, which has permanent structural changes in the brain, adolescent child.
Yes.
So, do you know it affects their sense of uniqueness? So here he is trying to feel better, and it's actually changing his sense of uniqueness. It's involved in the hippocampus, in the emotional regions of the brain. It has a negative impact to their brain. So now we're going to add that to the mix. So now, because he had the predisposition for addiction, when my son was prescribed an opiate for an injury, the disco ball dropped. For the first time in his life, my son had a sense of wellness. It was like the ultimate anxiety cure. I feel comfortable in my own skin. I have the courage to be in a group and display my dynamic personality. I have confidence I never had before. And so now the addiction cycle is turned on. And my son, with his limited ability to make rational decisions, continues to roll the dice and roll the dice. And that's what it is. And unfortunately, if you roll that dice too many times, addiction hijacks the brain and you lose the power of choice. So that when my son realized what addiction drugs were doing to his life, when he could look and there were some things penetrating in there that I was planting, and some, there were things landing and resonating that we got him in the right environment, which was we changed schools and put him into something with a little lower expectation to meet his academic challenges and address his emotional needs.
Right.
He started to crave life. And so he turned himself around, and He started caring about what he ate, and he started exercising, and he interned at a bank, and he got a very good job. And then, so now he's in college full time. He is working full time. He has a car. He wants to secure an apartment, which I really wasn't ready for. There was
Right.
something like I didn't exhale yet for my son. I didn't exhale. I
But
was
you
still,
thought you were heading in the right direction, though, right? You
yeah,
had so many good
yeah,
signs.
yes, because he got to the point where he was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to be in finance. I want to work in a bank. He asked me to buy him a suit. He had his father buy him a suit. I mean, he was really starting to be driven. And unfortunately, addiction had hijacked his brain. And I didn't know that, but I mean, I knew this was years going. I didn't know, I had no idea that he was actively using heroin, because that would have scared me to death. I had suspicions where I wrote letters and, they were dismantled, that I was being paranoid. But I remember he came over. This is a little difficult, so bear with me. But I remember him coming over weeks before he died, and he looked very skinny to me. And I said, why are you so thin? And he said, I'm just stressed out. And I said, are you using drugs again? And he said, no, Mom, I'm just stressed out. I'm just stressed out. And I was making him food, and I said, get on the scale. And when he weighed himself, he was well below his weight. And I said, okay, well, you need to go to a doctor and get a diagnosis, because if you're not doing drugs, something's not right. And I can help you, because at the time I was practicing holistic health, and he was like, I don't want to do drugs. Well, okay, well, then let me help you go find out what's going on. And he said, I'm so tired. And he put his head on my shoulder. And he lingered there. And that was very unusual. Now he's 18 years old. And he whispered, I'm tired.
Oh, wow, Lisa. Wow. It was a cry for help.
Absolutely. And that scared me.
Yeah.
And then he asked if he could see a psychiatrist, and he needed money. So I gave him a check to see a psychiatrist. And I was nervous that he was going right to a prescribing doctor, but simultaneously relieved that he was acknowledging, I can't do this alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I do remember lying in bed the night before my son died, and there was a news report interviewing young adults struggling with addiction. And I immediately got this sick feeling about my son and heroin. It was like if it was whispered in my ear or something. And I went, no, no. And I went to pick up the phone to call him, but I realized it was late, and he got up extremely early for his job at the bank. So I didn't. And I just finished reading the last page of a book called Surprised by Grace by Tullian Chividin. And I don't know if I pronounced his name right. He's Billy Graham's grandson.
Right.
It really resonated with me as I identified with Jonah's resistance of God's will. And I had this feeling that I was running from my call for decades. One of the most powerful things I took from that story was the need to let go of control and trust God to do what I could not. To quote him in his book, he said, we win by losing, and we triumph through defeat. And at that time, when I was thinking about Casey, I was about to panic, because that's what I did. I was always worried. I saw a motorcycle on the street. I was like, please, God, don't let it be my son. The phone rang. Please let my son be okay. That was the world that my life had become. It's Bernard Township Police. Oh my God, please let him be alive. It was just pick him up. And so now he's in a place of what looks like safety. He's in school. He's going to work. But yet, why is he so thin? Why is he so tired?
Right.
So I'm putting all this together, and I still haven't dealt with my fear either. So this is a compilation. And I just felt mentally defeated for the years of worrying about Casey. And in that moment, the book and all these connections, I said, okay, God, I can't save my son. I'm letting go. You save him.
Okay. Wow. So that moment, that literally was the night before?
Yes, because the next morning I woke up with a heavy feeling. I felt like I hadn't slept at all. Shortly after dropping my youngest child at school, I received a phone call that my son Casey was 2 hours late for work. My mind raced with possible reasons he wasn't there, because he was known for his punctuality. I dialed his phone over and over again, anxiously awaiting for his flabbergasted voice when he realized he was late for work. With every missed call, my heart raced faster and faster, and a barrage of scenarios played out in my head, coming faster than I could even process, and panic began to consume me. My hands were trembling so badly I could not dial the phone to call local hospitals. When I was through and my search came up empty, I was told that his car was not at his new apartment, so I drove to the police station hoping they could trace the phone. I explained to the front desk that he had not been seen since the night before, not answering his phone. He was completely out of character for him to miss work. Yet I waited over an hour before they even came to talk to me. And when he did see me, he sat so relaxed in his chair, showing no visible concerns for my son's absence or my distress. He asked me questions about any prior drug use, and the minute those words came out of my mouth that he had a history, he sighed, calmly told me he was probably sleeping a night off, not to worry about it. But I was dramatic, I was scared, and I explained the feeling welling up inside of me. I am sure, I told him, my son is in trouble. I am sure he's in trouble. He leaned back, unmoved by my plea, sipped his coffee. His expression was curious, but it was not concerned at all.
Wow.
There was no urgency. For him, probably so familiar, just another day at work, just another troubled, rebellious teenager. Or maybe, sadly to him, my son was a dirtbag, a loser, an addict, not worth the trouble. I don't know what the response was. Maybe we just get so used to our job, we forget about the faces, the human faces involved in our job. Mm-hmm. So I just asked the police to follow me to my son's apartment. I kind of regret that, but I did that because I knew if my son was there, he needed medical attention, and I wanted them to be ready.
Why do you regret that?
Well, I'm going to tell you why I regretted it.
Okay.
My experience when I got there. So I can still remember the overwhelming feeling of doom that greeted me as I ascended the stairs and down the hallway leading to his bedroom. The air was thickly strange. I could feel it like wrapping around me like a heavy fog. The officer announced himself as he cautiously pushed the door open of my son's bedroom. And I saw his face. And I let out a noise that was supposed to be a scream, but it was different. It was a moan, so unfamiliar and so large it had a body of its own. Because there was my beautiful, handsome boy, laying sideways on his bed, in his pajamas, facing his television. His head was tilted backwards. His eyes were closed. His mouth was slightly opened. His skin was pale and his lips were colorless. One officer restrains me and the other placed 2 fingers on the side of Casey's neck. I stared at him, searching his face for change in his hopeless expression, but none could be found. He looked up. "Ma'am, you can't touch him. You have to leave."
Oh my gosh.
I struggled with everything I had to reach my baby, but his grip only got tighter. I was screaming, "That is my son!" He released me outside the bedroom door, stood in the gap, his eyes serious, his posture was so solid, and my mind couldn't bear my reality. "Why won't you let me hold my baby?" My legs weakened, my body hit the floor, and I knew that I was fainting. Yeah. I forced myself to a kneeling position and begged him to move. "I can't," he replied, while I was on my knees, all 4. He stood there and he said, "I'm calling for backup." Within an hour, several officers were on that scene, and I frantically explained to them that this might be their job, but that lifeless child they would not let me hold was my son. Yeah. Still, they insisted I waited outside. When I refused, one of them threatened to put me into a police car. I was so powerless. In defeat, I said, "You're heartless," turned around and stepped out of the doorway. Immediately, they locked me out. I sat on the stoop in my bare feet as I entered what felt like hell. A few minutes later, a detective showed up and he saw he couldn't open the door. I explained to him it was locked and that my son was in there and he had died. And he said in a serious tone, void of any expression, he said, "We take these situations very seriously, ma'am." And I couldn't comprehend why I just told this man that my child died and that I'm his mother. And he treated me like I was the one that killed him. Desperate to be with my son, I walked over to his motorcycle and rested my head on the wheel and waited. One of the detectives came outside and knelt beside me. He handed me my shoes and told me, "I have a heart and it's breaking for you. I have children and I'm going to use all the power I have. You will hold your son. We just want to make sure nobody hurt him."
Yeah.
5 hours later, he returned to escort me to my son. By now, they had moved him. They wrapped his body in his comforter like you'd swaddle an infant and laid him on his bed upright. I laid next to him. I wrapped my arms around his chest, and I pressed my face against his cheek. I took deep breaths of his freshly shampooed hair. I put my lips on his eyelashes. I found life in his hair, so I lingered there. How do you leave a moment like this, Elizabeth?
I don't know.
How do you respond when the examiner tells you, "Say goodbye"? I hated them all for invading my sacred world of death.
Yeah.
They wanted me to wrap it up so they could end their long, emotional, difficult day and return to their families. They wanted me to let go of my son's body so the man waiting with a green bag and metal stretcher could take him to the morgue, and I could go home and tell my 9-year-old that his big brother was dead. And again, I submitted to my powerlessness, and I closed my eyes, and I sang those words to him. I sang to him as a baby, read to him as a toddler, and texted him as a teenager. "I will love you forever. I will like you for always. And as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." How do I deal with that?
All right, Lisa, that's I've heard it before. Every time I hear it, it's very hard to hear. My heart goes out to you. Every mother listening right now, every mother, every parent, but especially every mother, I am sure is transfixed on every word that you've said. It is hard to believe that out of that and what I'm sure seemed like a dream the next few days and the weeks that followed, a nightmare, but like you're walking through slow motion. What is happening? What's happened? Out of that, where can hope come? Out of that, where can future be? I mean, that's the question we all ask at this point is, what now? How do you reconcile any of that? Where do you move forward? How do you move forward?
Well, I want to tell the audience that my son died at 18 from a combination of a prescription antidepressant, a prescription antihistamine that he got from that psychiatrist I paid for, but the HIPAA laws I didn't know, and heroin. My story, Elizabeth, yes, it's hard to tell. It is hard to hear. I feel pain even now when I tell it. You likely feel pain when you hear it. So why do I share it? Because my story is in progress. And the story that I have today is a message of hope, and it demonstrates the power of choice that we have, that we can choose what our minds focus on. I had to grieve, but we can change our brains and our perceptions by processing that pain until it serves us and we no longer serve it. And I want to show you that. I want to show you what grief looked like when the unimaginable came into my life. The thing that we say, "I'd never survive. I'd kill myself.
Right.
I could." How do you make it? "Oh, you're so strong." Am I? Let me tell you what it looked like in the weeks to follow that day. The darkness. I have never experienced such anguish and emptiness. This is how I address my family and friends. They want to know, how are you? Can we keep you company? I've tried to force myself through the grieving process in a desperate attempt to escape the pain that tortures me day and night. It is different where I am, the world. It smells different, it feels different, and it has changed. I am a stranger in a world of my own. If there's any feeling that exists outside my agony, it is absolute exhaustion. I am encased in a relentless fatigue that makes the simplest task so overwhelming. I read of someone chasing the sunset to capture the light of day. The writer said, "The quickest way to reach the sun and the light of day is not to run west, chasing the sun, but to head east and plunge into the darkness until one comes to the sunrise. The only company I long for you cannot provide. I want my son back. I want him to walk in the door and pick up his guitar, show off his beautiful talent. I want him to walk up from over that small hill where I stare at his grave, where I beg God to allow him to come just for 1 minute. I plead and I wait, I stare and I cry. I know it's possible as well as I know it's not going to happen. I spend most of my days in the park sitting on the ground next to the body that once held the soul and spirit of my child. It makes me feel connected to him. My sadness is so deep. I cannot describe this catastrophic feeling of loss to you. I have an endless barrage of thoughts and scenes playing over and over in my mind. I recall every premonition, every soul-gripping emotion as I approached his room. I rehearsed 5 years of my relentless efforts to save my child, and I can still hear the song in my head that I sang to him as a baby, texted as a teenager, and held him in our final moments. Here's the thing, I will get my legs back and we will have time together. When and who I will be, I do not have the answer to that question. I am naked. I am stripped down to nothing but my humanness. I love you, but I cannot be naked before you.
So this is where you are months afterwards, right? I mean,
Yep.
and at what point, I know at some point you came to, may I say, the end of yourself, perhaps? You came to the point where you knew that something had to change. You came to the point where you knew you couldn't go on like this. I know those aren't your words, those are mine. But tell us about when things started to change and what that looked like.
Well, there's not one specific defining moment, but I will tell you this, that in the midst of this suffering, God was with me and he made it very, very, very obvious. And I have been asked multiple times when I heard God's voice in the midst of this. And the truth is that if you had asked me in the last 30 years when I have heard God's voice, I would have to pause and think about the times in which I heard about it, because we don't hear his voice like we hear each other's. Mm-hmm. But in the last 5 years, I had to stop and think about when I didn't hear it. It is true that he's close to the brokenhearted and those who are crushed in spirit. God spoke to me and he made his presence known to me. And one of the most significant moments that changed my mindset was when I was maybe 3 weeks after my son died. I was feverishly studying heaven and the afterlife, anything that could connect me to him. And the scriptures that once gave me comfort about there's no sorrow and no gnashing of teeth and no pain in heaven, those scriptures that once gave me peace tortured me, because although I was relieved to hear my son was somewhere blissfully happy, I felt this overwhelming disconnect, because how could he be happy and see me in a literal pool of tears,
right,
reeling in anguish over his death?
Right.
So that meant we were disconnected and he was out there gone without a hope. And I started to lose my mind. And I write about this in my book, which is in progress. And I talk more detail in other speaking forums. So I'm going to just, for the sake of time, just get to the point where I really felt like I was losing my mind. And we all say, oh, I almost lost my mind, but have we? Mm-hmm. I actually felt a disconnect between mind and body as I contemplated the indefinite separation of me and my child. And instead of crying and begging God for relief of my pain, I was begging him to restore my sanity, like in a panic. Like I'm about to be lost and never be found. Like I'm losing it right here.
You felt yourself on the edge. You felt as though it was you were about to literally lose it.
Yeah, I wasn't coming back. Yeah. The train was on the track and I could feel it and I was panicking. And in that moment, I was brought back to 4 months prior, holding my daughter's hand while she was giving birth to her child. And she was screaming and begging me for help. And I thought, if there's any other time in my life that my daughter was crying out in such anguish and gripping my hands and begging for relief, I'd have been panicked and looked for ways to help. But because I could see what was happening, I was holding her hand and I was like, baby, hold on, honey. I see it. I see your son. I see life. It's coming, honey. It's coming. And with that, she let out the final push and her son was born, and her tears like combined with her laughter, and there was joy. And in that moment, God gave me an analogy I could cling to, that my son can see. He sees, hang on, mom. He sees the life. Because when we are to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. He sees the life. He sees what's to come. He knows my joy will be his, but my suffering is not.
That's very good. Yes.
Yeah, that it was like as if he spoke to me in a way that I could understand and I could hang on to. Once again, I felt connected, like we're not so severed. There is but a thin veil. And I began to say, okay, what's the purpose of this anguish that God has allowed in my life? Because I was further along in my journey with God to know that it wasn't a lack of love. I didn't have my fist raised to the air. 10 years prior, maybe, but I was at a point in my life and I had suffered enough hardship and developed enough of a relationship and had enough faith to know that if God allowed this to happen to me, then he spared me from something worse, and there had to be purpose in it. So my son's death, part of God's plan? What was it? And it brought me to a place where the answer to that question became essential to my survival. And my journey through the suffering has truly led me to the answer. This is the grieving process today, Elizabeth. If you had told me what I was going to be doing for a career, I would have told you didn't know me. But the truth would have been that I didn't know myself. I had limited beliefs as to what my life's purpose was because I measured the call on my own ability to fulfill it. One of the most powerful aspects of my journey through grief that I can share today is the strength that sustained me. There's a song by the artist Hillsong that explains this best. It really does explain the 5 years through the journey of suffering, what it was like. There's a grace when the heart is under fire, another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be, there is this reckoning. I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire standing next to me. There was another in the waters holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding, oh, how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burden where another died for me. There is another in the fire. So, if you find yourself in the pit of darkness, drowning in the sea of pain, shackled by addiction, or burning in the fire of suffering, know there will be beauty to come from the ashes of your life because there's another in the fire with you.
Yeah.
When the reality of God's presence was undeniable and the grace to endure the unthinkable was available, I dug deeper into my mind. God started to give me a revelation of what it actually means to cast down your imagination and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. I began to study the brain and the mind connection. I studied the work of neuroscientists and psychiatrists like Caroline Leaf and Andrew Newberg and Daniel Siegel and Daniel Amen. I returned to college and studied the science of addiction and brain health. This lent itself to a new mindset as I challenged the law of attraction. We are what we think. Our thoughts govern our feelings and influence our behavior. And I even want to quote you from your book. When you say, whether you believe in God or not, it's undeniable that a universe obeys certain laws that are immutable and unchangeable and don't depend on our belief system in order to work. By acknowledging that the world runs by these laws, we also acknowledge that our minds, our bodies, and our experiences are bound by natural laws as well. This knowledge allows us to leverage these immutable truths to our benefit as God intended and help change our expectations about the outcomes in our lives. So we have these expectations of outcome, how we're going to get from this point in our lives to this point. But the truth is, in my story, it is the adversity that brought change in my life. It's the change that challenged my life. It is the suffering that changed my life for good. When my son died, I told my family I'll one day get my legs back and I would emerge with a mission in hand. And today I could say to you and to the audience listening, I am no longer in that fire, and I am no longer a slave to fear. I am not bound by my human limitations, and I have a completely renewed mindset. I have a mission, I am an advocate, and I have had the bittersweet opportunities to educate, inspire, and influence people in schools, churches, recovery homes, political forums, advocacy groups, press conferences, and a variety of fundraisers. My grief-driven journey became a window into my own soul, healed me, freed me. From the depths of that sorrow, I found my true self, the tangible experience of an almighty God. I found healing, and the best part of all, Elizabeth, I have the blueprint for my life.
Yeah.
You and I often say you were created on purpose.
Right.
Purpose. Well, I know why I'm here.
Yeah. Best feeling in the world. Nothing can match that. And this is one of the reasons that I'm so drawn to you as a person, and I admire you so much. And it's maybe not for the reasons that people think. We hear your story and it's hard to hear, and I want to wrap my arms around you and take away that grief. But I look at you as someone who truly walks out, every word that I have ever written, certainly, and so much more than that. Somebody who can point to, purpose coming from the pain. And we use that sometimes lightly. In your case, it's so incredibly true. And you said something about, and I don't know if I have this exactly right, but you said the grief serving you instead of you serving the grief.
Yes.
Oh, I love that quote, because one thing that unifies all of us is grief.
Yeah.
Now, it may not be the same story. It may not be, and every story is different, every flavor of it, but we don't escape it. We don't escape it in some way, shape, or form, and it has a tendency to shape our life. And what you have been able to do is to truly take back your life through taking back the one thing that God gave you control over, which is your mind.
That's right.
But doing it in the way that he showed you. And I have to imagine that, and I'm hearing you, we talked before offline about what's going on professionally and things like that. And I know the journey, this journey now has just started in its current way. And there's so much ahead of you. And I see so many amazing things for you. You must have daily practices. You must have things that you do each day to keep yourself, because we know that overcoming limiting beliefs is a daily practice. We know that as long as we're here on earth, it's something that we're going to have to overcome, that fixing our mindset is not one and done. So can you think of daily practices and things that you may do without even realizing it to keep your health, to keep your mind where it needs to be, to keep yourself going back into the darkness?
Absolutely. Well, I would be lying to say that it doesn't visit me. Losing your child is like, I think it's like a thorn in the side.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, well, when I do experience those moments of grief or a flashback, I'm working as a substance abuse counselor, that can kind of put me in a perpetual state of grieving as I hear their struggles and think of what I could have done or shouldn't have done, or I see a young man who has all the issues that my son has and he's struggling, and all those things can trigger. And if I allowed myself to get caught up in that slideshow of grief and regret or pain, I would become ineffective. It would hold me captive. And we all know thoughts equal feelings equal behavior. If I let those thoughts run unchecked, my feelings will remain sorrowful and my behavior will follow. So one thing I don't do, and I wouldn't encourage anybody to do, is skip over the grieving process or not process the emotion. I think it's really important to process the emotions and get in touch. What is your core belief? Once you identify, take thought inventory. This is something I do. If I wake up and I'm not feeling so right, I ask myself what I'm thinking. What am I thinking? What thought is unchecked?
Good. That's good.
And when I think, if I can trace it back to, well, I'm really tired and, I might not be able to reach someone today. Well, then I'm like, well, that's really negative. I'm tired and I'm going to reach someone today because every day is an opportunity to plant a seed every day. And then I invite God into my situation. And that's the truth. I would not really even consider myself, which is pretty funny, religious.
Yeah, I
I
understand.
don't have any like particular religion.
Yeah.
Um, I just have a relationship, and that really
Yes.
is true. God is so personal to me,
Hmm.
and the love affair between us was never more authentic and more solid and more tangible than when I was in the depths of hell,
Yes.
which is ironic. And I wouldn't want to go through that again. I wouldn't want to experience that level of pain, and I might. But I am so grateful for what came out of it, and primarily the way I feel about God and knowing how he feels about me. It's so intimate. So I will get in my car every morning as part of my daily practice, and I say thank you for the opportunity to be a conduit of your love and an ambassador of your word. And without you, I have nothing to offer them. But with you, you can save their lives, you can set them
Yes.
free. So I ask him every day to give me an opportunity to reach the unreachable. You know them more than me. What can I say? What can I do? What will resonate with them? And
Yes.
this practice, always without fail, God shows up in ways that I can't deny. Testimony coming out of the mouth of someone struggling that really helped me. Thank you. I'm a better place. I'm not going to use. It's like relapse prevention.
Mhm.
I also teach on a regular basis as an addictions counselor. I'm not only counseling, when I'm counseling and telling them, pay attention to your thoughts, put your feet on the floor, relax your posture, let's do some focused breathing. And I explain to them that neuroplasticity, changing the brain, takes place when we meditate 5 to 16 minutes a day.
Yes.
All the programming and the destructive things coming from toxic thoughts or toxic substances, we can heal your brain through these practices, and I practice with them. I'm reinforcing that for me. So this job, this career that I have that it's double. It's I have the benefit of reaping the repetition and the rewards of that, so that I don't really experience the same levels of stress that I experienced in my life before. Things that would have ordinarily rattled me or stressed me out just don't. And that's the truth. And you don't even see that evidence unfold really obviously. It's when you reflect and you go, wow, I've changed.
Well, you
Wow.
you know what that is I always say, spirit, soul, and body, we need to work on each every day, right? You're not gonna If you don't work on your body, you're gonna get sick, you're gonna get weak. If you don't work on your mind, your soul, then your brain doesn't benefit. If you don't work on your spirit. So what's happening as I hear you talking is that God's allowed you now through what you do on a daily basis and working with these people. As those words come out of your mouth, they edify you. As those words come out of your mouth, it trains your brain and your spirit to say, this is truth. And so that you find yourself stronger and stronger. Because sometimes I think people don't really believe that we can get stronger emotionally and spiritually. I think sometimes they don't really understand that, and they've gone through something so difficult and that defines them. But
Mhm.
we can get stronger. It's not to discount what you went through. It's not to say that it's not horrific and all the adjectives that don't even begin to describe it. But can you overcome it? Yes. Does that diminish it? No. But it does add to your ability to change other people's lives. And if not for that, why are we here?
That's right.
I don't see a purpose beyond making this world easier for someone else. I can't define purpose without that. And I commend you so much for being brave enough to stay in the fight, for being brave enough not to give up. It would have been very easy to give up and give in. And I don't know what your life would look like now if you did that. I'm not sure. But I know that by being brave and by you stepping and facing the demon head on, that God then was able to use you in the purpose. And it wasn't you waiting for him, he was just waiting for you.
Absolutely. Well said.
And
That's
I
true.
cannot say enough about, and audience listening, I I just, Lisa and I could talk for hours. We've done
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I am certain that everyone listening could listen to you for so long. There's so many other aspects to the story and so many other amazing things that occurred and so many things for you to tell. We all really, I want to read this book. I cannot wait for it to come out. But in the meantime, I know that you're available to come speak to people. If you could tell people a few things, how to get in touch with you, just, like maybe through social media if you want, or website, YouTube, whatever you want to share. But also, if someone listening is currently dealing with addiction, or a mother right now is listening who may hear some similarities and maybe is feeling a lot of fear, whatever you can respond to and what I just said, can you give some guidance, help, some, where do they go, what do they do, next steps? I know that's a huge question, but whatever comes to your heart just to say to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's two things. One is I just want to tell the audience that regardless, whatever you suffer, whatever you endure in life, it really can be used for your good. Mm-hmm. To hang on and, to trust that greater good can come from the situation. I am living proof that it can, and it can put you in touch with your destiny and give you answers as to why you are here and promote a life that is fulfilling and purposeful. And there is no greater feeling, and Elizabeth, you can testify to that as well, yeah. That our pain and our suffering can be a staircase and not a wall. Mm-hmm. And that the story, and this is how I want to leave it, if I was reading a book and I got to a chapter that made me uncomfortable or was extremely sad or difficult to read, and I closed that book, Elizabeth, and said, that book was horrible. Wouldn't your response be, but you don't even know the ending? I read that book. The ending, you stopped in the middle of your story. Good. So I want to encourage everybody not to close the book in the middle of their story, that the ending is good, to hang in there and to see it as good, and let that be your mindset, because if you believe it, that's what it will be.
Wow. That's incredible. It's hopeful. It's just not giving up. I can't write down enough quotes from you. I need to do a book on quotes from Lisa because one is better than the next. I mean, you truly are a master of words. And I think that God's given you an ability to take the emotion. Not everyone can describe, can use words to communicate what something feels like or what that looks like. And I got to tell you, it's a little overwhelming how well you were able to do that. And I am certain in this past hour you've already changed lives. And I couldn't wait to get you on, because this recording will live forever out there in the good old internet, right? And I just ask God right now to bring people to it that need to hear it, to bring it to someone whose life is maybe hanging in the balance right now, whose future, whose hope, who's overcome with fear, whatever it is. We just never know who's listening. And I need you to keep speaking, because people like you is what inspires me to keep going and training and teaching and getting people to understand the way God created them and why. And that is our heart's cry. So I would like to talk to you for another hour, but I should probably bring it to a close. Maybe we'll do this again. As things start to unfold for you over the next year, I'd love to come back and revisit and see what you've been taught by life experiences and help you share some more wisdom to people that need to hear it. I can't thank you enough. I really just love you so much, and I look forward to everything that God's going to bring to your life. And thank you for being so raw, honest, so transparent. Not everyone's willing to do that. So kudos to you on that. And so thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you for the platform you provide to so many people to tell their story and empower those around them. And to answer your question about my email is Lisa Nadine, Nadine 38 @gmail.com. You said a parent struggling. Check your county. There are always resources for recovery, for addiction, for mental health. So check your county resources. Hunterdon County has High Point There is multiple places that I didn't know about. And to remember, it's only when our greatest love is God, a love that we cannot lose, even in death, can we face all things in peace. That is a quote from Tim Keller. So thank you, Elizabeth.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And just to wrap it up, guys, make sure you subscribe to this podcast, because I intend to always bring you quality like this and something life-changing. They're not always this intense and this long, but Lisa's story deserves this and so much more. But subscribe to the podcast, go on Amazon, get the book, Master Your Mindset, The Master's Way. Hook up with me on Facebook and social media. And I can tell you that when Lisa's book comes out, I will be the first person shouting it out to the world. And I will be the first person to let you know it's out, because it's going to change lives. So thank you again, Lisa, and thank you, audience. And guys, we will see you online virtually, and I will talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to Master Your Mindset Radio. Before you go, if you want to be part of a free online community of like-minded individuals for support, resources, and inspiration as you conquer your limiting beliefs and pursue your purpose, go to elizabethnader.com/community. That's elizabethnader.com/community, or search for Master Your Mindset Academy private group on Facebook. Looking forward to seeing you online.